I actually wrote the piece at 973ESPN.com. Jamal Jackson undrafted. Hank Fraley undrafted. Jason Kelce drafted in the 6th round. But why not, John? Tyler Orlovsky stepping right in. Kelce making a lot of money. They got to shed some salary. So is it a bizarre possibility or is it a realistic possibility?
I don't think it's a realistic possibility that he could be the starter this season. I think it's a realistic possibility he can make the football team if the Eagles decide to move on from Jason Kelce. And I mentioned because of the numbers they have on the interior, remember, he would not only have to jump over Kelce, he also have to jump over Stefan Wisniewski, he also have to jump over Isaac Seumalo. So while that could be potentially something to look for down the line, because he was a very highly regarded prospect at center, there just weren't many drafted this season. He had a draftable grade by most experts. So I think he's capable of playing in this league. But and by the way, that's from Orlovsky's standpoint. It was a little strange that he chose the Eagles in undrafted free agency just because they have so many bodies at the position.
Yeah, that's a good point there that, hey, well, if he didn't think he had an opportunity, he was, many publications had him as the top undrafted free agent available. So he probably had a lot of calls. You wondered if the Eagles said, hey, listen, because you mentioned Wisniewski, but do the Eagles view – it seems that they view him more as a backup and wouldn't be hesitant to keep him in that role.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think they like him as the game day interior backup, a guy who can not only play center but also both guard positions, and that's the kind of versatility you need on game day. So I agree with that part. But again, then you have, from all indications, the belief on this coaching staff that the long-term best position for Isaac Seumalo will be center. So if that were the case, I think Seumalo would step in as the starter.
Who wins that? Who wins that? Yeah, go ahead, real quick. Finish up because.
And then in case if Kelce's not there, I think, or as I said, Orlovsky probably makes the team as a backup center, and then maybe 2 or 3 years down the line, if Seumalo fails, then potentially he could step in and be a starter.
Who wins the left guard battle if Seumalo isn't the center? Does he win? Barber? Does Barber's play? I mean, how does that go down? I think that's interesting.
Yeah, it is. I think it's pretty clear. I think the Eagles would like Seumalo to step in if at either position. If Kelce's going to be here at left guard, if not at center. Because then I think a lot of it has to do with the plan, as I mentioned, on game days, where you basically dress a backup interior lineman, and that would be Wisniewski, and you have a swing tackle, and they would prefer that to be Alan Barber than Matt Tobin. So I think from that standpoint, their best case scenario would he would go in, Seumalo, I'm saying, and seize a job. And all of a sudden you have really, really good depth. But if not, they know Allen can play the position at a fairly high level, and that's sort of a nice safety net to have.
One thing that we talked about the other day, John, is the theme of this draft competition. And it seems that the offensive line, we talked a lot about receiver, corner, running back having competition, but offensive line kind of got left behind. And Howie mentioned that. He said, that was one of the things he said. He referenced that they thought they had a lot of competition on the offensive line.
Yeah, and by the way, I didn't even mention Chance Warmack. There's a potential that he could step in. He's a former top 10 pick in this league. Now, granted, he was a disappointment by and large in Tennessee, but there's an opportunity he could step in and be the left guard as a starter. So, and that's what I've been talking about for weeks. There's so many bodies on this team, particularly in the interior, something's got to give. And that's why a lot of people are putting 2 and 2 together and saying they're ultimately going to move on from Jason Kelce. We'll see how that works out. But certainly all these guys can't make the football team. It's only a 53-man roster. And they had a lot of injuries on the offensive line last year, so they certainly have to feel comfortable with what they have. And we'll see how it all shakes out. But they have a lot of offensive linemen that are capable of playing in the NFL.
Yeah, and we discussed a little bit yesterday, but they also have a lot of wide receivers, and they might be in a spot where they need to keep an extra wide receiver. They might keep a 6, so that could limit, another area.
Yeah, and that's part of it. I mean, as I said, you only keep 53. So if you're going to keep 6 receivers, that's probably going to take a defensive lineman or an offensive lineman away from you. So perhaps, we talk about Howie Roseman. I think there's dominoes left to fall. He mentioned at his post-draft press conference, he said, we'll see how things shake out by August and September, basically. And just because something looks this way in April, now we're in early May, it doesn't mean it's going to look that way in August, never mind September. So there are guys, Kelsey being one of them, Michael Kendricks, as we know, that potentially aren't going to be here. And then you talk about wide receiver. You're right. I mean, do you really want to keep Nelson Aguilar? It's going to be tough to trade him, but it's a tough cap hit to just release him. And maybe that even spawns off Jordan Matthews, believe it or not, is a potential trade candidate.
John, we're talking with John McMullen, 97.3 ESPN.com, at JF McMullen on Twitter. Do you think that, because in history, we had Dana Holgerson on earlier, and he looks at Wendell Smallwood as a guy that volume, give him the ball more, and he could do more. He said when we gave him the ball 25 times, that's when he was at his most productive. Now, we've talked a lot about Smallwood and the fact that they didn't bring in a bigger back, but I've seen people mention the Eagles as a dark horse for LeGarrette Blount. So do you think the running backfield is set, or do they still have their eyes on potential upgrades?
Well, as I said, Doug Peterson certainly didn't seem excited by the thought of Wendell Smallwood being his lead back. So, yeah, I mean, people talk about Detroit, the New York Giants have been the two teams most mentioned for LeGarrette Blount. And you could see certainly the Eagles being a stealth team coming in there and kind of stealing a back like that. I had my eye on Jamal Charles. Obviously, he signed in Denver because of his history with Doug in Kansas City. I thought that was a possibility after the draft and after the Eagles weren't able to land Dalvin Cook. Clearly, they're not comfortable with what they have at the running back position. So that's one of those things you're always looking to improve. I don't necessarily, that's one of those things where you saw LeGarrette Blount in Pittsburgh versus LeGarrette Blount in New England. It wasn't the same. And that's a really good organization, Pittsburgh, by the way. I'm not sure. Actually, I am sure. You're not getting 18 touchdowns out of LeGarrette Blount in Philadelphia. Is he better than Wendell Smallwood? Probably. But I'd be very, very cautious in going that direction.
John, and one thing's for sure, the running back competition is going to be interesting. And I don't even know if it's competition more so than it's carve out your role. What is your role in this 4-man backfield? Because, 3-man, really. I mean, you got Pumphrey, you've got Smallwood, and you got Sproles. Those 3 guys will get the bulk, and I guess Ryan Matthews won't be here, right?
Yeah, I mean, the Eagles refused to flat out say it. They said, we'll see how it works out. But all indications are that Ryan Matthews, the only reason he's still here is because he can't pass a physical and he can't cut an injured player. So ultimately, they'll either come, I believe, to a settlement as far as waived injured, released injured in his case, or they'll wait till he can pass physical and then cut him at that point. I would be stunned if Ryan Matthews was still here and a part of this team by week 1.
Yep. So we got a lot of competition at the running back spot. We talked about the offensive line where, I think that's going to be another very interesting spot. Wide receiver. The whole offense, it seems that has elevated competition. And then you flip over to the defensive side, where really the Derek Barnett, Vinny Curry, Chris Long, that little triangle there will be another highly competitive spot. You throw Steven Means into the mix there, so the theme continues on that side of the ball.
Yeah, and you can even throw Alex McAllister, and obviously Marcus Smith is still here, although I think this could be the end of the road for Marcus Smith. But, yeah, I mean, the depth is a lot better now at defensive end, and that's something Jim Schwartz wants because he'd prefer to use a four-man rotation. He'd prefer to have Brandon Graham and whoever the second guy ultimately becomes very fresh for those fourth quarter situations where you have to get to the quarterback. And the best way to do that is to sort of give them a little breather earlier in games and have guys who are capable of playing in a rotation, whereas you're not going to completely fall apart. And that's what the Eagles are envisioning, and we'll see how it works out. It tends to be when you play as well as Graham did last year. Remember, he was a second-team All-Pro, so basically he's one of the best four defensive ends in football. Is what that tells you. When somebody plays at that level, it's very difficult to take them off the field. It's just you think about it and you say, I want to keep them fresh, but you don't want to take that kind of production off the field. And that's kind of the case with Graham and Fletcher Cox. So while Jim talks about rotations, it tends to never end up the way you want it to, simply because guys, when you have really good players, you don't want to take them off the field.
John, you wrote a piece over at FanRag Sports NFL, where John covers the league nationally as well, regarding a local guy in Sidney Jones. There's been so much about him, but talk a little bit more deeper about the Eagles and their pursuit of him, and why Philadelphia might have been the perfect spot for Sidney Jones.
Well, the Eagles had tremendous interest in him as a prospect, and I believe that not only would he have been in the equation at the 14th pick if he hadn't been injured, I think if he would have been there, he would have been the Eagles' pick. That's how much they liked him as a prospect. And Anthony Patch, their director of college scouting, was at his pro day when he got injured and he went down. And I think Sidney was obviously very disappointed, a little depressed, and he got a handwritten note from Anthony Patch. And it's a guy, if you know Anthony at all, he survived brain cancer twice, so he kind of knows about adversity. And he was just trying to encourage Sidney Jones, and it's something that stuck with him. He was the only guy to send, how we are today with email and text and things like that. Anthony Patch was the only one to send him a handwritten note, and it really meant something to Sidney Jones. And I think in a lot of ways he was hoping the Eagles would take him because of that. And it worked out, obviously, for both sides. And I think it's something that's probably going to work out very, very well for both sides.
Yeah, there's been a lot of talk about Sidney Jones and his recovery time. Various doctors, 6 months minimum, we've read. Everybody has their own opinion here. But let me ask you about Sidney Jones himself. I mean, if you take the doctors out of it, do you get the feeling that Sidney Jones thinks he could play sometime this year?
Yeah, he thinks he should be able to play. And, his surgeon, who is Dr. Robert Anderson, who's kind of the go-to guy for those injuries, is the one who put the timetable at 4 to 6 months. And the Eagles have kind of pumped the brakes on that, and I think rightfully so, because that's very, very optimistic. Generally, if you look at the history of that type of injury, and then you consider the position that Sidney plays, it's a so-called thoroughbred position. The last thing you want to do is rush somebody back and have the risk of re-tearing the Achilles. So I think the Eagles are going to be very, very cautious. But, by any timetable, he should be able to play at some point this season. However, that doesn't necessarily mean the Eagles are going to throw him out there, because there's a couple things with that. Understand, as he goes through rehab, he can't do the proper things you normally do to get ready for a football season, especially for a rookie. He's not going to be at OTAs. He's not going to be at mini camp. He's not going to be at training camp. He's not going to be healthy for all that. He's not going to be able to do his normal conditioning thing. So while the Achilles might be healed, he's probably not in football shape. So I think the Eagles are going to be very, very cautious with him.
Yeah, that's the tough part about it is, he really can't do much. I guess we say that now, but we don't, once August comes around, how long, when did he hurt that? In February? March? Early March?
March 11th is when the injury. March 22nd, I believe, was surgery. 6 months from there would be late September or late August. Let's see, March, April. We'll do the math on the radio. But, yeah, he should be, as I said, from that. But that's very, very optimistic. And remember, Dr. Anderson is, as I said, he's the go-to guy for that particular injury. And if you're going to get surgery, that's the guy you're going to go to. But there's a second part of that, and he's also trying to help the kid get drafted. So you're trying to be as optimistic as possible. And I think the Eagles understand that. The Eagles realize that. And they're going to be very cautious, as I mentioned. That's not to say he's not going to play, but I could envision a situation where they say, you know what, it's not worth it. Let's redshirt him. Let's start him in 2018. It's a possibility, so you have to throw it out there.
Yeah, no doubt. He'll be a story to keep an eye on, and I know a lot of people who have been watching the Sixers situation, now to have to go through it with the Eagles could be, a little bit a little rougher than it would have been had there not been some precedent set ahead of time, right? The fact that we've seen this happen not once, not twice, but 3 times locally already.
Yeah, and I have a feeling just from the people are not going to show as much patience with the Eagles.
No.
I don't think so. It's a little different for them. For whatever reason, they're just not going to accept that with their football team. So it is a little bit more difficult if that's the plan for Philadelphia. But hey, there's that old Buddy Ryan saying that if you start listening to the fans, you'll be sitting next to them real quick. So you can't take that into account with your decision making.
The piece you wrote today at 97.3ESPN.com, it's a good look at Nate Jerry, who played safety in college. The Eagles already kind of said they're going to try to move him to linebacker. You wrote that he could become the hybrid player for the Eagles. How do you envision him potentially, he's a 5th-round pick, so a lot of times guys in the 5th round, sometimes you just see special teamer. What is your view of the Nebraska kid?
Yeah, I think he starts as a special teamer. Remember, Brian Brayman's not back, and the Eagles, since Dave Phipp has been here, have been really good identifying special teams players. Matt Collins, too, will be in that category. And I think they'll both play very well, and that'll be their roles to start. And eventually you hope they develop into players that can help you on the regular offense and defense. In his particular case, as the league shifts, everybody's playing 11 personnel, 3 receivers. A lot of people talk about it being a glorified 7-on-7. You've seen this players. There's not a ton of them, but everybody's looking for them. And Deion Buchanan is probably the best in Arizona. Mark Barron with the Rams is another one. Shaq Thompson with the Panthers. These guys who've sort of been safeties, but they were oversized safeties, and they moved them to linebackers. So because you got to be able to cover in today's NFL. So if he can do that, I can see once Nigel Bradham is gone, remember, he's only got 1 year left on his contract. I could see him slipping in as sort of that Eagles nickel linebacker right next to Jordan Hicks.
Yeah, and there were some reports, John, that the Eagles, I guess, tried to move Kendrick to San Francisco on draft day maybe, and, no takers for Kendrick. What's his future look like this season?
Yeah, I don't think he's going to be here. I think it's Evan. I mean, the Eagles have been trying to spin him off for a while now. It's difficult because of his salary. He barely played last season. I'm a little surprised they didn't cut him when they had the opportunity to, but they thought they could get something for him, even if it was a conditional 7th-round pick or something of that nature. And perhaps they can in a future draft. I think it'll become easier. One thing, once you start up with football activity, and it'll start in OTAs, and we'll get to rookie minicamps starting this weekend, mandatory minicamps, and then certainly as training camp starts, the injuries are going to start piling up. And if somebody has a linebacker issue at that point, then it becomes easier to trade the player. We saw it in a much higher profile manner with Sam Bradford. That's what fueled that trade. So injuries can always come into the equation.
Say it again, John. Rookie camps this weekend. Football this weekend. Say it again, my man.
Well, the Eagles are May 12th, so the Eagles got a little bit of time, but some other teams are starting this week. The Eagles will have their rookie minicamp starting on Friday of next week. But, yeah, it's here. We've gone from the off season. Now it's the 2017, the preparation for 2017.
There are so many this wide receiver story to me is really they totally overhauled and this thing is crazy. I mean, you go. They brought in the kid Bailey too, another guy they like. He's like a forgotten guy at first. When they first signed him, it was like, oh, this guy's going to make the team, right? Rashid Bailey, who they liked a year ago, and ended up not getting him. Then they bring him back. Now there's almost no shot he makes the team.
No, and same thing, unfortunately, for all the Paul Turner fans out there.
And the Bryce Traegers.
All the Bryce Trags fans. Yeah, the Bryce Traegers. Well,
the Treggieites.
Again,
the Turnerites.
That's why Chip Kelly would always say, it's in the sand, the depth chart, because things can happen, and injuries are a part of this game. But certainly when you look at what they have at wide receiver, yeah, guys like Bailey and Turner and Treggs, they're not going to make this football team unless something happens. Right.
All right. We got plenty more NFL this week. Of course, John McMullen all through the mini camps and training camps. And, man, it's coming. I was looking through the Eagles calendar last night when I got off the air, and I said, man, they got Doug Peterson speaking one day. They got Schwartz. They got Reich. I said, man, we're back. I mean, this is it. Football's here, man.
Yeah, it's back. May 12th. Rookie camp, and then OTAs, and then mini camp, then training camp. Remember, the only thing is after the mandatory mini camp, you get a little breather in between training camp.
I think we took like 3 weeks off last year of just, hey, let's recharge the batteries.
Yeah, and that was, unfortunately, Nelson Aguilar didn't take his time off. He went straight to the strip club. Poor Nelson. All
right, John. John McMullen here at 97.3 ESPN.com. At JF McMullen, read his piece at FanRag Sports NFL on Sidney Jones. Thanks, pal.
Hey, thanks, Mike.